Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Is This Working? Fresh off the heels of our beloved Habs getting eliminated in the playoffs. There's no time to mourn. There's no time to be sad. I am here with the DDHL GOAT, who had Hall of Fame results as a career after Hall of Fame results. Welcome back. I've got to start with a new question. Is this working?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. This is really the first time tried to find a free software because StreamYard is expensive, and this one, Riverside, I've never heard of this program before, but we're testing it out as we're recording, and yeah, they got a 14-day trial, so let's see.
Okay, I will admit this is a bit of a new spin on this for me. Usually I come up with a list of topics before the guest comes on, but you, one, from China, requested to make an appearance, and two, hit me with your own list of topics. So I guess we'll just dive into it. One of the things that we wanted to touch upon was this year's playoffs and finals. I want to start with the question, did you feel the heat from the Avengers?
I mean, I think I embraced the role of the Emperor. What was it, 1 or 2 seasons ago? I just embraced it. Turned into Thanos, though, which was fucking hilarious. Yeah, I mean, but it just makes it so, I don't know if it helps the because like I could totally see like any other GM in my position being like sort of like letting their motivation go down, right? Like at this point, you know, I've somehow won 6, right, with the first 2 being the first 2 seasons, and it's like it's gonna take, like, unless someone goes on a run, at least a decade for someone to catch me. So having the Avengers and everything, like, still motivate and still having fun to like play that role, like, you got to earn it to dethrone me. So I didn't let the foot off the gas pedal, so to speak. So like Jake beat me at my very best, I would say.
I was impressed with the thought and consideration he put into crafting his plan. A lot went into identifying which teams are going to be playing the most in the playoff period and specifically targeting players from that team. So I was very impressed with that. I don't know how much work I'm willing to do on that level, but respect to him for doing that.
Like, I'll touch a bit on that. Because, like, one of the few videos I did this year, which was like to talk about games played and the gap. I can, like, again, I know how the optics could look to some, like Blondin, who's not even in the league anymore. Like, it could be seen as, oh man, KYT thinks he's so good, he's like throwing a bone to like the shitty teams. But ultimately, it's also, well, I love to talk strategy, but also because we split truck into blocks and hits, and we might add shots. And because these are categories, it's not like goals and assists where, there can be a lot of zeros, even for the elites. A lot of players, most of your roster is going to collect like a shot, a block, or hit. So when you fall like hundreds of games behind, you're just like making it easier for, like, I made another recent post for certain tiers of GMs to just do way better. You're like shooting yourself in the foot, and it's not something like, I'm not giving people something like, oh man, this like crazy strategy. It's just something that is obvious that all GMs will eventually realize, and I want them to all realize earlier so that the league is more competitive as a whole. So for me, I always felt like my heart's in the right place when I do this stuff, and I see it that way, like games play is important. And I know, like, I've talked about this, and I've seen, looking back, based on my memory, like, you've been up there in regular season games played. So it's like, it's not like I'm the only one who discovered it. We all like sort of independently discovered its importance. Maybe some of you have coincidentally stumbled upon its importance, but I've seen like the Chinks consistently up top. And to talk about the Jake thing, it's something that I was doing since the COVID run, since the start of my run. Like, the only nugget I'll add is that what's interesting is also like the spread to consider is the spread of the games played. So what I mean is, like, sometimes it's okay. You might hate the schedule because you have a lot of 2 games in between. But if you have a lot of 4 games also, you can mix it up with, like, this makes it so that you should be more diverse with your with the teammates that you have, the teams that you have. So like if you have a lot of Dallas guys, and that week you might be boned because you have a lot of 2 gamers But if you have a mix of different teams, then you can have, okay, you can have like really like everyone has like 4 or 3 games, and then the next week everyone has 4 or 3 games, and you're sitting all the 2 games guys that you have, which goes to, a strategy that you've mentioned. You probably still feel that way, like many years ago, where you really believed in just diversifying teams, because like then you don't lay an egg, right? Like, so to speak. Like if Colorado sucks, like John, he kind of is pretty weak on a bad Colorado week. And here with games played in the playoffs, that's also a thing that you can do, where that gives you the flexibility to mix in 4 gamers with other, bench 4 gamers. So like I wasn't really concerned with like Marner having 2 games or other places like that, because I know that week, because I have other guys with 4 games, I just fill that in. So yeah. So there's that consideration to make when it comes to games played. But yeah, again, not every team lacks that vision. But then when you look at the regular season, there are specific teams that just like if we vote shots in, which I think we both think will happen, some teams just won't be able to win unless like someone like shakes them, and like you gotta play the 4 game guys. Like you need every shot that you could possibly get.
Yeah, so I think the concept that you're alluding to, which is getting people to realizing certain strategies sooner, like they'll eventually get there. Like there are a lot of nerds in this league. It's the concept of raising the floor, just to get everyone on a similar wavelength, to, be, to not have anyone fall too far behind. As to what you were saying about having the mix and getting a lot of guys or a diverse setup of guys on 3 or 4 games, or like 4 games and 2 games, one of the potential problems that I feel like I ran into during the playoffs was when all my guys have 3 games, then how do you choose? Especially because I went with the money ball. So I depended on this critical mass of games played. And then all of a sudden, if all the guys have the same games played and they're all like 50-point guys, well, who do you play?
So you ran into the conundrum.
Yeah. So circling back, so for the playoffs and the finals, did you have any thoughts or points that you wanted to elaborate on this year specifically?
Yeah, so like I know, like, I'm not, again, Jake at the bar was like, oh, Coyote's gonna go scorcher. But no, like really, like I think it comes like it's good to have like quick reactions and try to have quick takeaways from like Derek in his matchup where he almost beat me, and Jake. So I'm not gonna, like, for lack of a better word, blame them for being slightly inaccurate, but it's just that like every week there's just so much volatility. As you know, like you told me you were either the best roto team or the best team or best offense for February, right? And then like it falls apart. So like, for example, I already wrote it in our group chat where it was like, a lot of stats can be looked at different ways. Where you look at the barrage and say like, whoa, he had way too many blocks against Derek. It's just like, well, maybe Derek's base level of blocks just sucks, right? Like it's just, you have to, yeah, it's hard to say. And the base level of blocks that I needed, like my plan went like executed extremely well. That's why I was able to beat John in blocks with, everyone looking on paper, hey, John might have the tools, but I was prepared with my trades and ad drops have just enough that even if John like felt like he had an edge, that I had enough collectively to overcome that. So I needed that level of blocks. And that's why, like, for Jake, again, the quick takeaways, like, oh, maybe Carr needs more offense. But it's like, again, like, I had a bad month offensively, but I still managed to beat John in goals. I ended up beating Jake in assists in our week. So it's like, I probably didn't need more defensive help. I won every blocks and hits in the playoffs, which I planned to do. So it worked out. So like, it's like, no, the Empire is not going to make any big tweaks. It went as planned. And to speak on, well, we're going to dive into it later, but I'll dive into it now. Strategy was always to, since the first year of this run, was to win truck or blocks and hits, because I've mentioned that they are the lowest variance stat of all their stats, right? If you project to do better than the other team, you're going to win that, depending on how that projected margin is, you're going to win that 80 to 90% of the time. And so since I went back before, did some research, started this run, I've only lost truck, blocks or hits once in like 13 playoff runs to Gabi in the finals of the year one, where he actually either, I forget what he did, he used his 3 pickups either like the second week to add like guys like Hathaway. I think, or he did it before the playoffs. So he was someone that like just also added the 3 or 4 specialists to fight against me. But I was able to, like, despite losing truck, I was able to win. But yeah, like, so against Jake and any other team, that's the strategy is like, I always feel like I'm already, okay, before we split truck, like I'm already a category ahead heading into the week, right? So I think that explains like the success level, why I've been able to get to 5 finals, which is like even against Jake, like I'm up in truck. Like he thought John was more dangerous because they have more abs game. But like I felt like for sure mathematically, at least in my way of modeling, that heading into a matchup up 2-0 already, like that's tough. Like you have to win plus or minus game winning goals, which we know is very volatile. He won both. He swept the goalie categories, and I won assists. So like, you know, when you lock in the low volatility stats, you're like, hey, let's coin flip the rest, but I'm ahead 2-0 already, right? So to me, went according to plan, and teams again that had weak offenses didn't really try to fight teams like me and you probably, or other teams on truck when they should have, because they have like their opportunity cost is lower because they have, okay, I'll just say it, shittier guys, because I can't think of a better word. So that's how I see it. And yeah.
So if you feel like elaborating on it, you did mention that, you know, against John, you managed to scrape together just enough blocks. I recall looking at the matchup. So between weeks 1 and 2, I remember looking at the matchup, and even though you were ahead by, I want to say like 20-ish blocks, and then you started benching all your block guys, and I'm like, the immediate thought that went through my head is, isn't that a bit risky? As, you know, John has some of the highest performing block shots guys. You know, it's not out of the ordinary that all of a sudden Ian Cole just blocks 9 shots in a game. You know, how do you weigh the mathematical, like, are you using projections? Are you using your own internal calculus? Like, how do you come up with just enough blocks?
Perfect thing that I didn't list, but I did want to talk about was, to my knowledge, Derek Blaze asked me like the other day, like just last week, does anybody do any complicated modeling in the DHL? I'm like, to my knowledge, I don't think so. So like what Gas does, and I think he's fine with it being public, is for his spreadsheet, he just uses the last 3 years, averages is out, and like adds like a special weighing mix, right? Like nothing too complicated. Tonin had mentioned how he like sort of like is able to now categorize different players, but again, it's very simplistic, right? Like uses just their current stats to do that. I've mentioned maybe a few times, like the bulk of my knowledge is from The Athletic. So if you want to know most of what I know, and I know you're signed up and a few people are signed up, just sign up to The Athletic and use Dom's projections to take a look. I just mainly use Dom's projections just to like have a feel. And that's why I told you, like, I tabulated the top 6 teams because like we didn't know at that time. I didn't know if Dan, Eric, and Godwin were gonna make it, but based on the skater stats and this Dom's projections, they were all really close. Like I think might be the tightest top 6 we've had in a while, and that's why I told you like top 6 team. Like I think any of us have between 10 to 20% each to win it all, and it was gonna be that close. And like whether it's, and we would. Like we have to recognize it's volatile, not to take away from anything from Jake, but had you won, it would have been like, because we would have spun a narrative that, you know, you drafted really well, except if Gas won, it would have been his spreadsheet, etc. Jake, first year he finally tried, he wins. But ultimately, the truth is, in my opinion, by the numbers, we were all really close.
You hear that, Dan? By having The Athletic, you are the most informed. Yeah, and I think the narrative around, you know, if John won is like, well, he just has this overbearing offensive machine.
Oh, I didn't answer your question. I answered your question quickly, which is like, maybe it was the games played that made the difference, but in my calculation, like that's what made it so like if I benched a certain player that you thought I shouldn't have, maybe he had less games. Like in that calculus, it was like using Dom's projections and the current season, it looked like I project to have just enough blocks by week 2. So It was simple calculation.
Okay. And you also mentioned about like, starting a matchup down two. For years, that's how we felt about John because he would start every matchup down 0-3 because he just had no goaltending. So his skaters had to do the bulk of the lifting. And this year that he actually had solid, if not good goaltending, that made him all the scarier because all of a sudden he's coming in a relatively fair fight, except on his offense, where he's probably going to clobber you. So that being said, we've touched upon like we've mentioned different strategies around here. The money ball strategy, the min maxing, which is, I guess, kind of what you're doing. One of the points that you wanted to touch upon was Dan strats, and what type of team is that good against
Right.
for you?
Right. Because I didn't want to poo-poo on it like during the thing when we were building up the chosen one, because like, okay, I'm not gonna say anything like because it just ruins it. But now that like I've lost a little and whatever, and Dan has moved on, the Dan strategy is really the best against teams like John and previous Barry teams, right? The Barry teams that did not want to not did not want to, but used it as a challenge to win without truck. So like we talked about John being 0-3, so he was actually going to matchups 0-4 because he was always like bottom 3 in truck. So that's like a huge handicap when you're already losing 0-4. You basically have to win every single other category. So I think the Dan and the Dan strategy the philosophy can be used heading in against specific matchups. Like if you're against John, you can think about how to modify your team in terms of attacking him that way, where it's like you try to win hits and well, he's sort of like been able to fight that off this year with being a solid blocks team. But let's assume for this example's sake that he doesn't care about hits and blocks, and now you have two categories that completely negates goals and assists, right? They just trade. You leave plus minus and game winning goals as like a coin flip, a goalies as a coin flip. So like that's the dangerous part of facing a Dan team if they're able to negate your strength and make the whole matchup a coin flip. And then you're like, fuck, like, I worked so hard to create this team, but now, there's this team that's just like constructed that doesn't have as much talent, but he's able to construct a way to make it like a 40-60 matchup at worst. That can be really annoying to face. So in your interview or podcast with Dan, he did mention like that's why the Barrage is not like the best team to use the Dan strategy against, because he realized that I tried while it was still possible to be a generalist, and that leads into the Barrage strategy, which is like, me, you, and Tony has talked about like what's the component, like, it's not what part of it makes it so that we haven't seen this run ever. Like we've seen a mix of winners and ebbs and flows, and I think it's a combination like of all the little things that I've done, which is not just the good core, but then the key was recognizing which category that the league as a whole, not as a whole, but most of the league was undervaluing, so that what can I target in free agency or later on in the draft as a team with usually not that many draft picks to take advantage and maximize that, to get, to raise my team at a very low cost, right? Because like the firepower of my team, it's not like it's unique. Like we were seeing that with John, right? We were seeing different renditions of it. Like I think Jake's team in the past, like Crosby, Ovechkin, McKinnon at their prime and stuff like that. And so, and your cast with Jake, we talked about how he and that my team is stars and scrubs, and it has been stars and scrubs since 2020. And I highlighted guys that I had, like Jordan Stahl would be like the classic. I would feel Moneyball multi-category 40-point 189 truck. And then I had Larson, Martinez, Var, Graves, all with 200, 300 truck. That's when we started, like, I feel like the good ass era where we're like targeting, where I highlighted these guys to target. And so when it came against, that's why like Dan lost truck against me in the finals, because ultimately you can look at CNC stats and think that Dan's ahead of me. But I remember I made that comment. And you're like, wait a minute, Carl, I'm second in truck and season stat. I'm like, point taken. I was probably too hasty in saying like I was the only one to be able to match up to Dan. But like my thinking was, and shout out to our MTG background, like I was thinking post sideboard that like truck wise, I was able to take, and like the season stats, it was kind of like a mirage. Like if you're looking at it and think like, oh man, the barrage, they don't have enough truck, then you're not like looking at it right in terms of like which guys I was gonna bring in if I had to face Dan. Same kind of reason. Like you and Jake mentioned the trades that I made, like the McBains and whatever. Those were if I were to face Jake, if I were to face Gas in the finals, I would have certain tools to be able to like fight those guys specifically. Whereas against John, I just like those guys were all like all 6 bench spots were like a bunch of those guys.
Yeah, so I mean, you might call your strategy stars and scrubs. I'll stick to min maxing. I guess it feels less offensive. Yeah, I kind of forget which part of the conversation that was specifically, but I did take umbrage when you were like, oh yeah, like I'm the only one that beat him. Like, wait, well, hold on. Like I paid attention, and you're right. There was a time where, again, shout out to our MTG background, I tried to go rogue and win without truck. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard. You need the core to do it. And like you basically need John's forwards with my goaltending, and then you probably might do it. But if you have anything less than that, it's a bit rough sailings. Unless we shake up some rules. So what do you have in mind for rules changes? Like among, I don't know if you want to do a brief overview of the current like proposed rules that are floating around. I don't know if you have that list handy. I definitely don't.
No, not really. So for me, it's not specific rules I wanted to bounce things off of, but yeah. First, I wanted to use this as like also an outlet to maybe like to get some, I don't know, rant. Maybe not rant in my head, but no,
Talk your shit. Talk your shit.
Okay, I like to finish the whole strategy point. Like when I think back about how close the matchups have, like I won 4, but like some of the wins were like really close. I beat Dan like by a category or whatever. Barely beat John, right? We were tied or whatever. But then you start to think about, well, but I made sure I won 1 or 2 categories. Like imagine if those 2, like the truck categories, right? You know, imagine if it was like I didn't prep for those. So like if people fight me on those 2 categories, it becomes harder. Like I would have lost those. So I think I really contribute my wins to this min-max way of thinking, like really feeling like I'm heading into the category with such an edge. It's like I've already won 1 or 2 categories. I think is a huge edge. So straight to the rule changes, I feel like, I don't know, I just want to spill my heart out a little, where like I had a talk with Mike Blondin about why he quit, right? Like, this was like months ago or a year ago even. And one of the reasons he felt was like that, for this whole time we've been trying to make changes. And it's funny, like we have been making changes in the last few years, but during his time, he felt like we're trying a lot and like never getting anywhere, which is true. Like, but to my disappointment, obviously in his last year, like even if he's gonna leave, it was weird that he would join in the vote because he basically voted no to almost everything, right? So it's like, okay, you're kind of going against, like, it almost feel like out of spite, you're like, fuck you guys, you didn't want to change, so I'm not going to change either. So the only thing I wanted to, like, I thank people like yourself and Tonin for being thankful for the work I've put in, but it's because like over the last like 5-10 years, it's been like me and a few of you guys like putting a lot of effort in, but then like hitting a wall, shutting up for a bit because it feels like no one really wants change, and doing it again, no one wants change, doing it again, no one wants change, doing it again, and having this idea for like the middle season GM meeting, and then finally breaking through with something, and where we like changed like at least 3 things. So I mean, for me, it just felt like I felt Mike's frustration, but I also like always use that time to like recharge and do it again and make those long posts. And I mean, it's kind of hard. Like I had to, talk to, Calvin, Blaze, like typically people that, are gonna not have time to discuss rules or are gonna say no a lot to, like, okay, are you gonna reconsider changing? And then we found out, and there's no secret, like publicly in one of the threads, Calvin said like he shut down because he felt like, his opinion was not valued. I think whether that is Blondin constantly shitting on him or him trying to get us to think about his salary cap idea, I don't know. But I'm like, Calvin, look, we got to work together on this, or else, we're not going to get anywhere. Like, I'm sorry if you ever like felt that way because of me or anyone else, but like, we got to move forward. And so, yeah, all that to say, like, basically it's been exhausting on my end. And because like I tried to do posts and podcasts because I know not everyone has time to listen or read. So yeah, to get to a point where last year we finally did a bunch, had that discussion, was just like, wow. But like, basically, hopefully we keep it that way. Yeah, I'm just thinking back like those long threads of like different categories and like how many times that we've had a thread on plus minus. And when I did those early podcasts, right before even Tonin did his weekly thing, where I was just specifically asking like you guys and him to come on to discuss all these rules that like it never got anywhere.
So yeah, there's a few points to kind of unpack there. I think human nature is pretty resistant to change. Instinctually, most people like to live with the problem they know than the unknown that they don't. And so when not everyone responds well when they get hit with a mass dump of information, no matter how well researched and presented it is, the scope and gravity of it alone can be off-putting and put people on the defensive from the get-go. So if I had to take a stab at why the previous efforts took so long to gain traction, that's kind of what I would identify as being like kind of the main problem with that approach. What that did do, though, is that did at the very least start conversations. And so on the flip side, the opposite of doing a mass info dump is if you do not tiny, but smaller, more digestible, but more constant reiterations and repetitions of the idea that you want to get through. Because that way you give individuals the chance to digest little nuggets of information. And I kind of highlight Derek, one of his main motivations, or one of the realizations he had for starting his weekly show was he got inspired. He told me the other day he got inspired by my annual recap, which is the big info dump.
Right.
But he's like, this is fun. I feel like I can do this. And he started the small, consistent threads. So I feel like that was a turning point to opening up of ideas because he actually stayed consistent. Does it weekly. It's small nuggets of info because, the first minute or two is a bit, then it's 5 to 6 minutes of like matchups and news, maybe another 3 minutes of projections, and then there's maybe like 90 seconds or 2 minutes of an actual topic. But it's not more than that, and then it's done. You kind of tune in next week and then, if the same topic comes up, or if someone else talks about the topic, right? It's kind of like a social movement where you need it to gain traction. So, like you noticed, the big info dump didn't work the way you hoped it would, but here we are now with, like, there's your content, there's Derek's content, there's this, is this working? And all this kind of helps to keep ideas front of mind, as well as keep the conversation going and refining those ideas so that when it comes time to actually make a decision, people feel like they're more, like the conversation's been going on long enough that they actually can make an informed decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's an angle that I should possibly consider trying more. Yeah, but then it's like, the long form actually like appeals to like specific GMs in a league, right? Which is why like some people love your previews. And yeah, I think my only concern, I don't have that concern now with Blonde and Gone, but maybe with some GMs it's like that some people might vote out of spite because they feel like their voices haven't been heard. So it's just like, fuck you, I don't want to do this change because the one time I wanted to change, no one listened to me type of feel, which I'm not saying is even unjustified. It's just like that they feel that way, but like.
And that's kind of, I think that possibility can also get mitigated with more frequent conversation, because with more frequent conversation, there are more opportunities to hear other people and give them the, not satisfaction, but like give them, like, acknowledge that you've heard them, right? Calvin, as little as he puts like as content, or as little as he puts in terms of replies, I know for a fact that he's like on top of all of these audio contents that we have, because I'll get a text like an hour after I put something up that's responding to a whole bunch of points that I made. Like I know you're listening, Calvin, but and I do, I do take into account like what you have to say. I just think with how far apart we are because we're older, we have responsibilities, we have families, more frequent digestible conversations feels like the way to go in order to gain sufficient traction to bring change relatively quickly.
It reminds me of when, like, even before I got there, remember, like, a few years ago, it was like you, Blaze, Gas, like early, or Jake even, right? You guys arrived early in the draft, and then like the 5 or 6 of you were like, agreeing on something because you finally got in a room to be able to like chat about these things, right? Bang, 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 and maybe
Yeah,
like
it was right before the draft. It was those who had gotten to Blondin's place early. So it was Mike, me, Jake, and I think Blaze.
yeah, yeah, Blaze was there. I remember
Yeah,
that.
and we just hashed it out. Point, counterpoint. Tried a theory, doesn't work. Try a theory. Oh, are we onto something? Adjust, adjust. Oh my god, I think we got it.
Yeah, so I think maybe like more stuff like the upcoming barbecue and stuff like that really helps because like I said, like we both know not a small percentage of people are going to listen to this pod up all the way to this point. A small percentage like watches Derek's thing from beginning to end, right? Like every week, or reads through your whole thing. But there's no escape when we meet in real life and we're like chatting. I do like, I mean, I've told Blaze this in person that it really annoys me when he says like he finds out about a new rule, right? Like I think you peripherally have heard of that, and it's like that's fucking stupid. And it's like a rule that we've discussed maybe for years, and then like we finally like we've done all the point counterpoint, and he has his like initial reaction to it. It's like, bro, like you could have just interjected at any point, but like he's not the type of person to like necessarily consume all the content that we do. So like for him, it's important to have that pre-draft meeting with you to be able to go through that point counterpoint. Like he's the type of like it's nothing against like we're not requiring people to listen to all the content like so having more regular frequent meetings is you're making me think like that's the key.
Well, I don't think it'll be worse than what we've tried before. Speaking of trying new things, I'm going to try to segue into a potential rule modification. How many special team points should a shorthanded point be worth?
I'm not sure, but all I can say is like that's what Jake talked about in the last pod. Again, I listened to the whole thing, obviously, because it was done in my driveway. But talking about how shots, that I might come up with stats to change his mind on shots because I came up with stats with the shorthanded points because it feels like, and I know, again, I reiterated this a lot, was like it feels like it's too much, but then you look at the numbers, like even Jake, when he came over, he was like, man, shorthanded points is like, it affects too many things. And then like, I looked at the stats, it would have changed, like he would have won, not a week, he would have won an extra category point one, and he would have lost a category point one time. So like his record would have been the exact same. Okay, so and then we look at how I got crushed by Jake in shorthanded points. But if it wasn't worth 5, it was worth 1, I would have lost anyway. So the situation where it changes, it seems like it's not as frequent as we think. And like when we get blown out, it feels like, oh my God, it's too much. But against John, it sets up the scenario where I think I was ahead by 4, and Sebastian Aho actually scored a shorthanded goal on the Sunday, which gave John an opening to beat me. So like that was one of the percentages where it affected a week. So and then Gabi was just like at the bar, but he's just riding off what he's been hearing, you and John and Jake was like wondering about, right? So he's like, yeah, like I also think 5 is probably too much. I didn't agree to 5 what I heard about last season. But it's like, look at the numbers, look at the matchups, it changes. But then like sometimes I think about like my goal in doing this change, and I'm like sometimes I question myself. I'm not even sure because like the point was to make it so you might consider a Kazikas or a McLeod more, right? And did it affect that? Like, yeah, sort of. So I have to think back. Like, I have to think back about the goal of the category. It's not like making it random for the sake of random. It's more like everyone knows to look at daily face-off and power play 1, And it's like, if all the power play one guys are gone, can we add some extra value of these other guys? And so jury's still out. But for me, I know 5 is not too much in terms of how it affects the number of matchups. It's just going to feel rough when you get bashed by Alex Tuck. But, I was just way behind. And I think you were probably going to lose anyways. He was like ahead enough, even if they were worth 1.
Yeah, I famously failed my Sezikis pickup, so I had to settle for McLeod.
By the way, before I forget, we have to look at, because I don't blame you, it's like a mistake in a sense, but it's also because our waiver rules are kind of weird, right? Where like you have to pick up a guy, because if he's playing on a Tuesday or a Monday, it like fucks up like when you need to pick him up by.
I'm pretty sure I just forgot to hit the button, but okay.
I think there's like, anyways, I'll look at it again, but yeah, continue.
Yeah, so like I had to settle for McLeod, who happens to play the same shorthanded shift as Tuck and passes it to him. So cool, I was magically negating some of the week 2 stuff, but week 1 was so far gone. Like Tuck was an absolute monster in this playoffs for Jake. Good pickup. Not sure that Gobby's gonna get his return on that trade, but we'll see. Maybe that's a trade tree for another day.
Yeah, but yeah, to me, it's not clear how. Like, I have to think about it a bit more. But I know Dan and Derek or Tony are fine with it, obviously, because it just adds this random mix. Whether it achieves certain goals that I thought it might. But then I also talked about how I wanted shorthanded time or shorthanded points to be shown as a category. One of the frustrations that Blaze mentioned was that he felt like he wanted to know how many power play points his guys had, because he felt like those were more predictive. So having them be in a separate column allows you to, better judge guys, which, I thought was fine. I talked about shorthanded time just because shorthanded points is so low counting. You need some other sort of like proxy to tell you your odds of getting a shorthanded point, right? If you know your team doesn't have like many guys that are on the PK, but you can use I guess you could use daily face-off as well. I ran into a wall with Tonin about this topic because he felt like if we added that, we would be adding too many things. We would be holding the hands of GMs a bit too much because he liked the grind of clicking players and finding out if they're on PK1. But I guess my counter to that would be we have truck blocks and hits. We have season stats ready to view, and it's not like we provide these tools, and I think it's not necessarily true that we're helping every bottom team by displaying these tools, right? Like Calvin thinks Lozon's enough, season stats shows otherwise. Just because we have stats doesn't mean every team's going to interpret it the same way, and I think it's just more user friendly to have it than not to have it, right? That's my final take on that.
When you say it, you mean easier visibility of categories?
Yeah, slow. So just having shorthanded TOI, time on ice, as part of the in your roster view or in the free agent view. So you don't have to click on every guy. So you can see, instead of clicking a guy and seeing what their average power play time or shorthanded time is, it would be right there in your face.
Can't you just change the tracked, change it because it defaults to track stats? Don't you just take standard and it's all there?
I don't think standard has everything.
It has power play points and shorthanded points separated pretty good. So sure, shorthanded time is maybe not in its own column, but I'm gonna side with Tone in here.
I'm not seeing that.
Okay.
I'm not seeing if I switch it to standard, right? We're doing this live. Okay,
yeah, I'm not sure if this is working, but
okay, if I go to extra, okay, I've never looked at clicking extra. I think that's what shows it. Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's not all there, but
in extra it does cover the Blaze complaint, which is the STP feels too high for certain people that only had shorthanded points, and he would have wanted to see them discounted so that he could make trades easier, right? And it is there. So this is an option that I haven't seen before. But yeah, going to scoring category and choosing extra allows you to see power play assists, power play points, shorthanded assists, I guess. Yeah, and shorthanded points here.
This is fun doing it live because I've never clicked on tracked per game, and all of a sudden, all of Jake's venting and rhetoric makes sense. when he's so easily able to be like, this guy's 1.5 hits per game and this guy's 1 block per game. Like, how the do you know all that off the top of your... I now know where you look, Jake.
I don't even remember, like, I work with these numbers in terms of just like looking at the athletic Dom's projections, but I don't remember it like Jake does.
Yeah, like I said, there's different... We're a whole bunch of nerds that pay attention to numbers at different levels and different intensities.
Yeah.
There's a couple points left on your...
Yeah, on my thing, which was like, I don't know, I had a group stage playoff proposal that, I could just talk about it on the barbecue really quick. Was like, really the goal was to see if there was a 1 week format that I would like, right? Because like one of my key things that the only way I would vote for something like that is if the playoffs were long. Because if it was just 1 week and it was like even just top 8, like 3 weeks were done, then like you would game the games played of those 3 weeks and it would just feel like too short. Like the regular season just feels like it would be way too long. So like, how do you extend it? How do you make it more interesting? How do you make different cuts? And so inspired by Four Nations, I was like, let's just cut to top 8 at some point, and then 2 groups of 4 and have them play round robin or double round robin with each other. And then the top 2 of each advance. Obviously the first place of group A faces second place of group B, second place of group A faces first place of group B. And then that's the top 4. They have 1 week playoff, and then the finals is 1 week as well, because like the whole concept was like Dan preference that a playoff system be the same length per match than the regular season. So like a mixing of that is birthed the system, which people are like, it's kind of cute. It's got some appeal. But I have to say, like, the current system, kind of like it. Like, kind of like after week 1's done, like you can make adjustments week 2, right? It's kind of like the MTG sideboarding thing in me that's like, finds it kind of cool. And there was a lot of drama. And like the concern with top 8 making it was, possibly lack of trades, which we haven't seen since top 8 playoffs have been introduced. And the concern was also that week 1, most matchups week 1 would be decided by week 1. And we've seen like this year, that's not true either. And we've seen that in past years. So those 2 concerns not that it doesn't happen, but they're not as big of a concern as we thought, like makes me like think, man, it's kind of pretty good. And I would only switch to this new idea, like just to spice it up for the sake of spicing it up.
I kind of want to rebut the notion that trades weren't an issue with going to 8. Were we 8 teams last year?
We were 8 teams last year.
Trades were at an all-time low last year. This year, the boom in trading, started by Drunk Tonin by his own admission, I think is because there was a more conscientious effort to try to shore up teams based on their weaknesses and stuff. But last year, trades, like I think I crunched the number of trades. Last year was like a gulf.
Well, I'd have to, you'll bring me the numbers on Sunday, I guess. Because like,
are you assigning me homework?
Because like the concern was always like, the thing is, I've always deferred, like I was always different in disagreement with John in terms of the level of trading, right? Like, I didn't think it was like, I'm the guy who, I speak for myself, obviously, because I'm the guy with no draft picks all the time. So I've never found it difficult to trade, obviously. And so when it was 6 teams advancing, I didn't think the level of trade was a concern to begin with. Other GMs disagree, like we respectfully disagree. And when we moved to 8, even if it decreased, from what I recall looking at it, I never felt it decreased to a level where it was a concern for me. Like that was like too hard to trade. So for me, it's like, if I can make, like, I don't feel like you need to be able to go crazy. Like if you're able to do a mid-season trade or two to address a few needs and then like swing for the fences before the playoffs, it was always, for me, it was always fine. But I get it. I get people who love trades and want them to happen and want league settings to incentivize that even more. But also don't know if the frustration from people in the past remember, like a lot of it was centered around harder to trade for goalies, right? At one point, that was like the main complaint. And so I don't know if that's mixed in with lack of trading in general or specifically, hard to trade for a goalie or get goalie help. Because to me, like, again, general trading for me, it was never that much of an issue. But again, I respect any GM who feels differently.
So, yeah, a couple of clarifications, I guess. I remember expressing that my concern around going to an 8-team playoff structure is that you would see trades dry up because there are less sellers. And if there are less sellers, there's by definition less trades that can happen. Especially, one thing I didn't really take into account was the level of parity, where essentially there was only one team that was out of it. Like, we were in the last or second last week of the year, and like Ben and Dave Ben still had a puncher's chance to get in.
Yeah.
So if you take into account that there's up to 10, maybe 11 contenders, the theory was there's just going to be no trading because people are either going to try to hang on to their stuff to try to get in and have enough firepower to do well in the playoffs, or, like, there's only so many players to trade for. Whereas if it's 6 and 6, then there's all sorts of merchandise supply and demand. So I remember expressing that concern. So this year, again, what happened where there were a lot more trades, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I just did a really quick overview. Last year, the number of trades fits on one page, and this year, it's on 2 pages. So it's close to double the number of trades as last year. Still eight teams making the playoffs. Now, what it is I think people were trying to adjust the mix of their teams, which feels a lot more like what we would call a hockey trade, where it's you're moving more like laterally rather than like I'm just powering up. It's like, well, I'm putting power in different places. And to kind of tie into that, one of those kinds of trades that I've always had the hardest time wrapping my head around is trading non-goalies for a goalie.
Right.
Like, what on earth? Like, how do you possibly try to even start making this make sense? So you have to, well, for me, you really have to boil it down to, I mean, I traded 2 dual eligible 40-goal wingers, and 2 firsts, 1 first. It's in a trade tree somewhere, for a horse of a goalie.
Right.
Who performed below expectations for 2 to 3 seasons before roaring back this year. So, ultimately, I mean, depends who you ask. Tonan's going to scream from the mountaintops that I won that trade hand over fist. But trading's tough. It's gotten better because we've had these regular conversations and regular content where we promote different ideas of, if you're going to trade, bring something to the table.
Right.
And that makes it a lot easier to deal with. It's a lot easier to start the conversation, it's a lot easier to keep it going, and it's a lot easier to kind of tie it up because you meet at the middle ground sooner, theoretically, right? Like, I will almost always say that Ben is one of the easiest people to deal with because you bring an idea, he's like, hey, I'll look at it. Okay, what about this? All right, cool. And like, it's done.
I thought of a joke where it's like, you're talking to the guy who like has been banned from trading with the Alliance, who thinks trading is fun.
I mean, like, we've a bunch of us have soft banned trading with you, and yet Gas potentially giving him a fucking starting goalie on a cup contender, but it's Skinner, so whatever.
But yeah, I think the math that you put out makes sense about like what we project would happen to the trades. But like, I think what eventually happens this year are teams, maybe it's this specific set of GMs, but the set of GMs that were like on the cusp, like on the, what's the expression? They were just like,
bubble.
Yeah, on the bubble. Like, they're the type of GMs that if they feel they can't contend, they're just going to sell early, right? And it's like willing to do that. Like, like even if I go for it, I might not match up. Like a lot of teams, like, you'll say this, like in previous years, you're like, I can't really beat the barrage. Like, I'm not going to do anything. I might as well. But Tonan's willing to like just sell. And Dan was going to sell at one point. He was shopping Uyghur. He was shopping, Trocheck and other players.
I don't think he was shopping Uyghur. I think a lot of people came knocking.
He was close. Like, I was one of the ones who talked him out of trading away Uyghur because I told him, like, straight up, he's one of the best assets in our system.
Right. I just want to clarify. Shopping someone means you are starting a conversation. I'm pretty sure a lot of people came knocking. I don't think... If you have those unicorns, so basically Uyghur, Cider, I don't think you shop them. I think people are tearing down your door.
Right. But he came, well, at least on that night, when he came to me, he was deciding between two offers, and you know, I'm sorry to out him, but he asked Thanos what his opinion was on which trade he should accept. And I was like, I mean, I don't think you should take either of them, but okay. I'm not part of the alliance. My two
Admit it.
cents.
It's because you didn't need him powering up one of us, right?
Right. All right. So I don't know if it was, again, this specific set of GMs, but that's what made it so, like, with Gabi also, like, he could have made the playoffs and had a more decent team had he not decided to, like, look into the future and stuff like that. So, and Ben also, right? Ben, like, 2 3 weeks later, he's like, oh, fuck it, I'm out, right? So that's what led to that landslide of trades from those teams. Like, all those teams that were on the bubble, right, that theoretically were still in, they all made at least 1 or 2 trades, which led to, like, the high count of trades. I don't know if that will happen again, but that's what happened. But yeah, I wanted to finish off, like, randomness and, like, overall philosophy of the rules, because I found myself questioning this, and I definitely want your feedback. This is, like, the key part, which is, I've been coming up with ideas to either add parity or to raise the floor. And when Jake and Blaze were last at our place, and you were there, I had a quick conversation with them, and the sense I got was, like, whereas, like, I wanted a worse team to still have a chance against a team like John's. Let's say, let's say you're a last place team, right? You're against John. You shouldn't feel like John's gonna automatically win, right? But then, like, Jake and Derek, like, sort of rebutted that. It's like maybe if you do suck, you should be 90-10, favorite. And maybe you should be a 5% dog. And then, like, I keep going back to that because, like, I think about these rules to raise the floor because I'm thinking not every GM in our league has, like, Gas's time of, like, spending on the spreadsheet, right? So when we there has to be a cap in terms of how complex we can make certain rules. If it requires too much effort to optimize and we make it so, like, a spreadsheet king has, like, a huge edge, then it's not, like, the ethos of, like, part of the ethos of being a weekly league is we want it to be, how do I say this, skill intensive, but, like, also, like, I guess efficient. Like, it's not time intensive, but it can be strategic while not requiring, like, the micromanaging. And so now that's why I sound lost. Like, I'm not really sure where that is, because clearly there's some GMs like me, you, Gas, Jake, who are willing, like, I'm just naming a bunch of GMs that are willing to spend the time, right, to invest the time. But there's clearly also another tier of GMs that, like, it's not, I'm not shitting on them. It's just, like, whatever their life situation is, right? The time that they can put in the league, they shouldn't feel like they are way behind because they can't invest as much time micromanaging certain aspects, right? So that's why, like, I'm kind of lost where I feel, like, where I am, because am I catering too much to specific GMs in our league at the cost of the enjoyment of the rest of the league? Because if we add a bench spot, for example, I think adding more bench spots helps more active people who add drop a lot, right? Because they're going to be able to switch off, have more hot players that might stay point per game, might stay hot for the rest of the season. And speaking about voting against any rule that improves the barrage, increasing bench size helps, right, those more active teams. And so, but am I thinking too much about what helps, like, the good teams? Yeah, I'm just spitting a lot, and I hope, China Man, you got part or understand part of my conundrum that I have.
So at McKibben's, the proposed bench expansion came with a corollary that we would limit the number of pickups and drops per week. Like, that's a proposed package, that there is an extra bench spot, but you can only add drop 3 times per week. Something like that. That was the proposed thing. No one did math. Everyone just ate nachos and drank beer and watched the hockey game. There was not much more thought than that. Don't at me, Calvin. Actually, at me, Calvin, if you have other math.
Add him on Twitter randomly, like, at Chingus Maximus. Why?
No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Don't give Elon money. Yeah, it's kind of comes down to design, right? When you're trying to, like, I kind of liken this to establishing rules, or, like, creating a game, creating a almost like a problem to be solved. It comes down to design, and it's important to keep in mind what the mission is. Always, right? And so The example that I will always draw upon is, why are we adding more categories? Because the mission is, we are trying to devalue goaltenders. 10% of the roster should not be responsible for 35% of your categories. We accepted 25%, which is why we are trying to get to the 12 categories, because then the math will math. When it comes to adding complexity, you know, it's again appealing to the MTG part of it. It's like weighing mana lands. To almost every non-competitive player, Mana Flood and Mana Screw is the worst thing in the world. To a fair amount of competitive players, it is also the worst thing in the world. However, it is the mechanic that allows Johnny Donuts to potentially beat John Finkel. However, the possibility exists. It is there by design. However, if the pro, the veteran, the person puts in all the work, the craft is honed, then they're going to win 99% of the time. That's the one example that I think you could look back to when trying to, one, figure out what the mission is, what the goal is, and two, like how you want to design it. So, you know, kind of circling back, from what I understand, is you're trying to weigh how complex to make it so that the nerds still can nerd hard and try to gain an edge, but you're not going to shut out the guys that don't have time to nerd and at least give them still a chance. It's in terms of just presence and involvement, and this isn't necessarily to throw shade. In terms of presence and involvement, Dave and Ben finished on the outside looking in, but if you look at, like, Dave was only missing setting his lineups. If Dave set his lineups in the first half of the year, he's a playoff team. Like, if he gets Simon Nemetz out of his lineup and actually plays and got like Alex Newhook out of his lineup sooner than end of January, he highly likely makes it into the playoffs over like Tonin. Ben, who sold pieces, was in it till the final week. I think by nature, fantasy hockey is the volatility. Because your random 50-point guy, who's 50-point guy at season's end, could get 40 of those points in the last 30 games of the season. Similarly, your 50-point guy could have also gotten 40 of those points in the first half of the season, and he's just stone cold for the rest of it. I think if everything is mathematical and a formula, then you're playing chess and no one's beating you. So as much as people harp on stats like plus minus, that may or may not be the element of random that you kind of need to have around. You can plan for it all you want, but I can tell you for a fact that I think out of January, I was dead last in the league in plus minus at like minus 50 something, and I finished like top half because February happened and my team just went plus 80 after being minus 50 something for like the whole year. So I think it comes down to, like, I think then you kind of have to look at it, right? 25% of our categories is like goaltending. Big if we get shots in there, that's another offensive category. And it's like, it's not a goaltending category, it's not a truck category. It's definitely an offensive category. So then we cater to the fantasy of the fantasy hockey for offense. So offense all of a sudden is 6 categories, like 5 plus 2 halves, and truck is like hits, blocks, plus minus-ish, right? So then that's like the mix in terms of like offense, truck, goaltending. Then we should probably analyze the mix of predictable, situational, and utter random, right? So you're saying shots, hits, blocks, predictable.
Right.
I would posit that special team points, goals, and assists are situational, because if a player is playing on PP1, you're getting snippets. If he's not, you're probably not. And then there's the utter random, like how many categories are we running that are utter random? Also things that are situational, goals against and AS are probably situational, because just look at Mackenzie Blackwood, whereas GPT is probably predictable, just get goalies down and winning teams, right? So that's probably another angle to take a look at, where we're so used to looking at offense, truck, and goaltending. If you want to take into account the other axis of the graph, that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think it's like, because I think Jake and Gas have made it no secret that they hate plus minus. But for me, as someone that's like, the mission for me is not even, because I don't have a set target. You're making my vision a bit clearer. It's more like how like for me, it's like how much randomness, like how do we fine tune it? Like is plus minus and game winning goals enough for the skater categories, right? Or is it too much? Or is it too little? You know, like that's the part that makes me ponder. Because plus minus is what allows you to beat a team like John if you have a worse offense, right? Or whatever. It's these categories that. So for me, I don't think about it as situation. I think about it more, but I classify it the same tiers of predictability before a matchup happens. Where you look at not Fantrax, or even Dom's projections or whatever. I know that if I have a 12 block lead projection, I'm probably going to win that week or whatever. Versus like a 5-goal lead, it feels like a lot, but it's not actually that much. Like the matchup is going to be really close because of how volatile it is. So it's like different levels of volatility. But yeah, it's like that type of thinking is how I think about everything else. Like, how does this help like the bottom teams? And like every rule is just like in my mind is not even like how much we enjoy it, how much it makes sense, like how much it rewards players. I'm thinking about like how it affects like the league from a enjoyment and parity standpoint. I'm not sure if that's misguided or not, but yeah, I think about it a lot.
I don't think it's misguided as long as the main design idea, the mission, stays consistent. As long as the decisions you're making, like if you start making, like on Monday you think about it and you're like, oh, I'm going to design with parity in mind, and then Tuesday you wake up and you're like, nope, I'm going to design with, I don't know, the math in mind or something, or like I'm going to design with like something completely different, and then Wednesday you come back. As long as when we're thinking about these potential tweaks and changes, the guiding star, like true north, whatever it is always the same. And I think once you establish that, then you kind of pick that and trickle down from that.
Yeah, so I think I'll finish off with like that bench rule, right? And how I'm thinking about it with like this guidance in my head. It's like, even if we have that extra rule, right, where it's max 3 pickups, we both know percentage of teams don't average anywhere close to 3 pickups a week, right? So like that doesn't even matter to limit the like advantage or disadvantage that some teams have. It's just like, it's just there to stop gas from picking up 10 guys a week, right? But
he proposed it.
He proposes because like Jake and I, like, so one of us fought back or something, said like, you know, an extra bench spot is like, yeah, like if we had 2 spots or whatever, if we had more spots, you know, the more active, like, hence the what the heck are you doing segment in the Tonin show, because a lot of people just don't do anything with their benches. And so when you add even one, that just like, yeah, it will give a huge edge, but like not huge, like a decent edge to the more active teams. But then the counter argument, it's like, you know, why not, right? Let's reward the more active GMs in a way, right? So it's like, where is that bar for me? And again, you know, I'm not sure. I'm going to go with the flow. I feel like, again, Gas and Jake are going to convince a lot of people to add the extra bench spot because of Jake's experience in the playoffs, where he felt like, you know, he could have used at least one more spot for his, you know, the injuries that happen, or for the rule that Gas wants to be voted in, which is like a reload of pickups every matchup in the playoffs or every week. I mean, either of those rules are a reaction to what happened to Jake, which is very fair. But I do feel like there's going to be momentum for those changes. And I think for me, I just want those concerns to be put out there, but I'm going to go with the flow when it comes to voting for those type of changes.
On the notion of putting concerns out there, I would caution to not knee-jerk overreact to a frankly absurd scenario where Jake had like 10 injured guys.
Right.
Like, how often does that happen? You know, like, it's just, let's not go too crazy at what is possibly an exception.
Right, because we've had this top 8 3 pickups for 3 years now, and I don't think any of us really felt, with the 6 bench plus the 3 pickups just in case, or this is like the one time where, you know, it really handcuffs someone.
And he won anyways.
Right?
It just fuels the lore that he was the child of destiny.
Man, I wanted Gas to win in a way because I do think there's merit in the moves he made. Yeah. Well, I didn't mention this in the strategy portion, which is like, you know, if you're going to be going hits and blocks and at the cost of offense, you better make sure that you're going over the top. right?
Kiefer Sherwood.
Yeah, Kiefer Sherwood. It's like, I think that's why, okay, I didn't mention it. I think that's why Dan, okay, maybe it's incidental. He decided to shift to more general strategy because ultimately you either have to go gas crazy or not. Because if you just do it, if you're just top of the league, you run into like the min maxers who just like stack a bunch of like hitters and blockers at the last minute to be able to get over the top. Like against Gas, I looked at my team. Even with the collection of guys I've collected, I wasn't gonna beat him in hits. Like I couldn't. Like he was impossible to sideboard against. And I think that's the position you actually want to put yourself in to really make sure you beat me in those categories, right? Like you have Mathieu Olivier, you took Hathaway from me, you like did all these things to make sure that no one touched you. And sure, maybe to some you went like it was a bit of overkill, but against the very top tier teams, like he had the tools to just like no, like tell me to fuck off, right? Like it's like I wasn't going into a matchup against him with like an actual lead. I would be like, fuck, I actually have to give up hits against him and fight him like in the other, or like I have to go down a category, I have to concede a category, and then hope volatility goes my way for the rest.
I want to use the term gas crazy from now on. We'll make it a thing.
But yeah, I look forward to this Sunday. Like hopefully we can, we talk about these issues like and go over again, not just like different angles, like you said, different dimensions of why we're doing this change, because it's not just like, oh, it makes sense hockey wise. Doesn't make sense with like how our GMs interact with the league and things like that. And we want, because ideally, I think people have fun when every team has their turn of being competitive. That's what, even if you suck for 5 years, but then the 6th year you're really dominant, you're rewarded for having Leo Carlson, McTavish, Robert Thomas, and everything finally spiking at the same time. I mean, then the wait was worth it. So as long as you're able to get your turn, I think that's important. And again, I know how it looks. That's rich of someone to say that made the finals 5 fucking times in a row, and who's probably, I'm probably a favorite to be at least top 4 next year. It's a long reign. It's a long reign up top. Prider fell off.
Fucking time. On that note, it's awful late. We successfully recorded this beast of a pod that you wanted without Tristan interference. Instead, your internet connection decided to do that for us. So hopefully we can fix that in post. Look forward to Gas, that presentation that I said I'd help you work on that I totally forgot about. And we need to hopefully stitch together some rules, changes, proposals. Maybe. I don't know. Is this working? I couldn't find out how to shut this recording off, by the way.
All right. I hope we have the first one. Thank you so much, Barry, for hosting this.
Yeah, no problem. Just I have no idea if I have controls on my end. So.
All right. Then I'll see you Sunday.
Yeah.